In a recent roadmap update, Microsoft has confirmed that Windows 10 will reach end of support on October 14th, 2025, and has called upon users to start making the transition to Windows 11. Now, it's important to note that this information has been known for quite a while now, but the news here appears to be that version 22H2 will be the final version of Windows 10. Before we move on, have in mind that the majority of this video can be consumed in just audio form, so if you have anything to do, feel free to do it while listening. Also, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing and turning on bell notifications. Thanks a ton. In a sense, this roadmap marks the official beginning of the final stage in Windows 10's lifecycle, and now that the end of the road is on the horizon, the community is becoming increasingly vocal about legitimate concerns. Given the fact that the only supported alternative Microsoft currently has to offer is an unpolished and hardware-wise non-inclusive Windows 11, the discontinuation of Windows 10 is something that users are generally, to put it mildly, not happy about. In fact, they're kinda pissed, and the comment section for this particular community post illustrates just how pissed they actually are. Maybe finish Windows 11 before forcing us onto it, one person suggested. This is going to be a really popular move, someone else remarked sarcastically, as there are a lot of people for whom Windows 11 is either not able to run on this hardware or an anathema. It seems a bit too soon to stop Windows 10 feature updates, another person commented, considering that it still has time left and Windows 11 still needs polishing. Now, as apologetic as it may sound, an unpolished Windows 11, assuming that it remains unpolished even in the year 2025, is an issue that both Microsoft and Windows users technically would be able to work around. Its non-inclusive hardware requirements, on the other hand, are a whole different pair of shoes, which have the potential of turning the end of support for Windows 10 into a significantly problematic event. In order to understand why the death of Windows 10 may prove to be a huge problem for Microsoft, it can help to take a look at the bygone era of Windows XP, because there's a rather interesting correlation between Windows 10 and its successors potentially, and Windows XP and the major versions that came after it. Here's a little timeline that I mocked up in order to illustrate the next part of this video. It's nothing fancy, but it should get the job done. The first point represents the launch of Windows XP, which took place in October 2001, and then we have January 2007 marking the release of Windows Vista. After that, we have 2 points marking the months and years that Windows 7 and 8 were released respectively, with the final point representing April 2014, which was the month and year that extended support for Windows XP had come to an end. Now, Windows XP was an extremely popular and well-received operating system with significant sales figures for its time. Since it existed in a much more innocent time for desktop operating systems, when user activity tracking was pretty much non-existent in comparison to the standards of modern day, it's difficult to estimate the exact number of devices it ran on. However, we do know that more than 400 million copies of Windows XP were sold globally in the first 5 years of availability, while the total number of shipped licenses is estimated to have exceeded 500 million. So it's reasonable to say that it had a pretty dominant market share by the time Windows Vista was released. Now, Vista had quite a number of issues. There's actually a complete Wikipedia article that is fully dedicated to all the major problems Vista had at launch, but the one that is most important for the context of this video were its hardware requirements, which proved to be a bit too much for the time. Even though it technically was able to run on all but the most ancient machines, a complete and smooth user experience was reserved only for higher-end devices. As a consequence, a number of users weren't even able to run it on their computers, and many of those who were took a massive hit to their system performance. Now, this was a much bigger problem for Microsoft than it was for users, because this whole inconvenient situation had an important saving grace, and that saving grace was Windows XP. You see, support for Windows XP covered a time span that not only included the launch of Windows Vista, but 2 other major versions as well. So if a user couldn't upgrade to Vista, or if they simply didn't want to, they could just stick with XP, knowing that they would continue to receive updates that are crucial to the security of their system. And the same thing was applicable when 7 and 8 launched, respectively. Now, fast forward to a more modern time, and yet again we have one version of Windows dominating the market share on the one hand, and a direct successor that is notorious for system requirements known for alienating even users with relatively higher-end machines on the other. But if we take a look at this timeline, we can see that support for Windows 10 is expected to cover a time span that given the current state of affairs, includes the release of just one new major version as opposed to the 3 that were released during support for Windows XP. Now, the current state of affairs may change, and that's what this little question mark accounts for. According to several reports that cite insider information, the next major version of Windows, codenamed Next Valley, is scheduled for release in 2024. Whether that new version gets released under the name Windows 12 or something entirely different is less important. What's much more important is the educated assumption that said version will be powered by AI, which will require dedicated hardware acceleration that will likely not come cheap. This sort of acceleration is currently not available in the majority of high-end hardware, let alone in older machines, so the expectation that Windows 12 will be the saving grace for stranded Windows 10 users in 2025 is not realistic, unless Microsoft decides to make some sort of light version that would maybe utilize cloud computing in order to power the AI features. Imagine the endless telemetry possibilities. It makes me feel uncomfortable just thinking about it. But that's a topic for another video. As of this point, there are no indications suggesting that a light version of Windows 12, or whatever it may end up being called, is in the making. Unfortunately, all the signs seem to be pointing in one undesirable direction. Should Microsoft stick with its current plans, Windows 10 users who do not meet the hardware requirements for upgrading to Windows 11, or anything else for that matter, will likely be left in a sort of a limbo in which they can't move forward, but they also can't really stay put because doing so would pose a security risk that would just grow over time. And the potential number of those cases is not to be glossed over. According to a survey that took into account around 30 million devices, 55% of workstations in 2021 could not be upgraded to Windows 11 due to Microsoft's strict minimum hardware requirements. Now, even if that percentage shrinks by 2025, which it certainly will, available data definitely leaves the possibility that the number of devices that end up stranded could easily be counted in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. That would not be a good situation, nor for Microsoft, nor for the users. So, how's this going to be dealt with? Well, the way I see it, there are a few things that could happen. On the developer's side, Microsoft could offer extended support for Windows 10, which would give users a couple more years to upgrade their systems. However, on a business level, that would also mean that Microsoft officially has another XP on their hands. As inconvenient as that may be for the company, I think it would be the fairest course of action, especially when we know that Microsoft would only have its own anti-consumer practices to blame for the situation. Another thing Microsoft could do is release something resembling a light version of Windows 11 that would eliminate the barriers to entry that have been keeping a plethora of perfectly capable machines from running the operating system in its current form. Similarly, they could also release a light version of Windows 12, however, I'm not quite sure about the likelihood of either of those two options. Why go through the hassle of developing a light version of any of the newer operating systems when extended support for Windows 10 is clearly on the table? On the other hand, Microsoft also might not do anything. In that case, organizations and businesses will have the possibility of utilizing LTSC versions of Windows 10 in order to continue receiving updates beyond October 14, 2025, which is an option that is both difficult to access and suboptimal for regular users. So what options are available for everyday Windows 10 users whose systems do not meet the hardware requirements for Windows 11? Well, one option to consider for those who prefer to stay within the Microsoft ecosystem in a secure way is to plan for a future investment in a Windows 11 compatible laptop or desktop PC. But if that turns out to be something that does not fit into their financial plans, or if they simply develop a dose of discontent towards Microsoft, a number of Windows 10 users might even decide that it's time to explore alternative operating systems from different brands. The most unfortunate thing in this whole situation is that a number of non-technical users, unaware of any changes in their operating system's lifecycle, will almost certainly continue using their PCs with an unsupported and vulnerable Windows 10. Now, some may label those cases as collateral damage, but considering the vast number of devices currently running Windows 10, the potential impact of this so-called collateral damage could turn out to be unacceptably significant. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree that the end of support for Windows 10 in 2025 may be problematic, or am I just reading too much into it? I know you guys usually have pretty strong opinions when it comes to topics like these, so it'll be interesting to read what you have in mind this time around. But that would be all for this time. If you found the video interesting, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay strong.